2008 was a very interesting year for me when it came to Sonic the Hedgehog. Where others had been burned and disgusted with the onslaught of middling to below-average console experience starting around 2003, I was completely enamored and attached to Sonic with many of the entries offered on both the Nintendo GameCube and Game Boy Advance. Between both adventure titles, the Sonic Advance trilogy, and his heyday decade compiled onto game collections, I consider my start into the Sonic series to be a very bright one. While it's true I dipped my toe into Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic and the Secret Rings, Shadow's potty mouth got my privilege to play the game revoked for a couple of years, and Secret Rings I only experienced at a friend's house for about, I want to say 5 minutes before my mom picked me up. I eventually got Secret Rings and, you know what, I don't want to talk about that one yet. Honestly, one can infer that I was lucky to be at the young age I was during the massacre of Sonic's reputation. An Xbox 360 and PS3? What's that? Look, Mom! This cool Sonic hoverboard racer's a blast! I was completely unaware of the damage and tarnish one of my favorite characters in gaming was getting, specifically on home consoles. After everything was said and done, though, one stray title rising from the ashes of Sonic's roughest period in his career caught my interest, and initially it gave me quite a spook.
By day, he runs rings around the world. But when night falls, things get a little hairy.
Sonic Unleashed was making its way to store shelves, and while I was always initially excited for anything Sonic as a child, the idea of him turning into this feral and mean-looking beast didn't click with me at first. My knowledge of werewolves at the time was very limited, with most of my exposure coming from Scooby-Doo and reruns of Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman. It seemed like that everyone was obsessed around the late 2000s with the creature. Sonic, Link, Taylor Lautner from the Twilight film adaptations. Everything was all about the werewolf. Sega, on the other hand, when it came to finding ways to shake up Sonic's next venture, were taking a few notes from certain beat-em-up series at the time. From the aftermath of Sonic 06's incredibly troubled development, Sega sought to clean things up and make something that would help alleviate the sour taste in fans' mouths by moving the series away from its bleak and experimental years. In April of 2008, Sonic Unleashed was officially announced to be in development. Director and lead game designer Yoshihisa Hashimoto had the goals of making this game the best it can be, and to avoid having the game be on rails while still keeping the thrill and speed of Sonic gameplay intact. Keeping this thrill would come at the cost of limiting the gameplay exclusively to Sonic. Unleashed would be the first mainline Sonic game since the series' 3D Jump to keep things just relative to Sonic, with many journalist outlets at the time taking issue with the incorporation of Sonic's varying cast. Were this kind of feedback I feel would eventually bite Sega in the back in later entries to come, I could see where the mindset was coming from following the gameplay execution of Sonic 06's cast of characters. Personally, as someone who grew up with the Sonic Adventure titles, I always thought having a variety of playstyles to choose from was always a unique way to shake up gameplay from time to time. On the topic of the Sonic Adventure series, Sonic Unleashed was initially planned to be dubbed the third Sonic Adventure title, and while I'm glad the honorific was kept away from Sonic 06, despite sharing plenty in common with SA1, the team ultimately decided to rename the game Unleashed in order to give the name its own identity removed from prior Sonic entries. In Japan, however, the game would keep a similar moniker with its title being Sonic World Adventure. So with Sonic remaining the only playable character in the game, there would be an eventual desire among the devs to flesh out Sonic to other audiences that weren't familiar with the Sonic game. And thus, Sonic's more feral alter ego was born with the Werehog. Get it? It's a werewolf and a hedgehog. Whereas Sonic during the day would have his new spin on traditional Sonic gameplay, stages at night would have Sonic don a more feral personality with slower platforming, accompanied by beat-em-up combat I mentioned prior. Even with its conception, Hashimoto understood the reserves the fanbase at the time would have with the Werehog, but hoped newcomers in the hardcore base alike would open themselves up to it. I had often heard the Werehog was conceptualized as a way to increase the length of Sonic Unleashed beyond the daytime stages, but I couldn't verify this information with the research I conducted. With the length of the night stages, I think it could seem plausible, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So for the first time in a while, the stars were aligning for a 3D Sonic game to perform well beyond the previous range of lukewarm to negative reviews. In fact, when it came to the build-up to release, it seemed very apparent the dev team wanted to find ways to make it up to the fans following Sonic's 15th anniversary. Oh, don't worry, writers, I still love you. Between incorporating a new engine dubbed the Hedgehog engine and tasking handheld studio dimps with a PS2 Wii version, the marketing went above and beyond in any way it could to garner good faith for the game. Bowling for Soup's Jared Reddick would be singing Endless Possibility, the main theme song for the game. Then you had Marza Animation Planet, the studio responsible for the gorgeous CGI in this entry that produced a few small teaser films and a beautifully crafted short with Sonic, Knight of the Werehog. And for the main soundtrack itself, the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra was brought on board to bring the various environments and countries to life with a beautifully composed score. But upon its release on November 18th, 2008, Sonic Unleashed arrived with the same wave of mixed to negative reviews prior entries had received. Despite its Wii PS2 counterpart faring a little better, review scores for the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions of the game were just as low, if not nearly as low as Sonic 06. Something just never sat well with me when it came to those review scores. When you compare a game like Sonic 06 to Sonic Unleashed, games that released on the same consoles with a completely different approach to gameplay, story, and production values, the difference I felt was night and day. Pardon the pun, but you know what I mean. It seems evident that by the time Sonic and Sega team were able to dust themselves off, it was too late. Sonic's reputation at that point had been dragged into the ground, nearly suffocated. After this unfortunate chain of releases that didn't jive well with reviewers, the mentality that Sonic was a laughingstock of a series among many in the industry began to feel commonplace. By the time Sega geared up for Sonic Colors' release in 2010, many of Sonic's lower-scoring games were removed from their official website, and this included Sonic Unleashed. And until Sonic Frontiers' release on November of 2022, Sonic Unleashed became the last full-price Sonic game for nearly 15 years. In a way, the game's core narrative sort of reflected the state of the Sonic series itself at that time, broken into pieces. But nowadays, it seems that this entry in particular has plenty of fans that contrast the prior reviews. It's a game I've often wanted to share my thoughts on myself, so join me as I pick these pieces up and examine a game that served as an important stepping stone for Sonic's future. Good day to you all, I'm the Squire, and welcome to another one of my Inquires. Let's take a look at Sonic Unleashed. Our tale begins the same place my previous Sonic-related Inquire concluded, the far reaches of space. In this cold exosphere, we see the stubborn-as-always Dr. Eggman prepare to launch an armada for invasion, and in stunning 2008 CGI, I might add. Without hesitation, Sonic shows up in the nick of time for Eggman's annual blueballing, and the two engage in a familiar yet pleasant spectacle of conflict. To set up the events of this game with what would have been the endgame to any other Sonic title up to this point leaves for a pretty intriguing start. It's important to keep in mind that games preceding Unleashed at this point opened up with a slower lead into your standard Sonic affairs. Considering how burnt 06 left casual and hardcore fans alike, taking things in a simpler affair to start is a great way to ease us into the action. Sonic, of course, makes no effort to devastate the fleet with all 7 Chaos Emeralds, leaving Eggman begging on his knees. The 300 IQ Doctor, however, has one last card up his sleeve.
But if I must, then I must. Put her there. I can't believe you fell for the oldest trick in the book!
As Sonic gets trapped after running his mouth, Eggman regains the upper hand and extracts the Chaos Emeralds from Sonic, now getting shocked for dear life. Using the energy from the emeralds, Eggman fires a laser directly into the planet, triggering a dormant figure to rise from its slumber, and shatters the planet into 7 fragments. As for Sonic, he receives a new beastly transformation from the incident, and snarls back at Eggman's destruction. With the Earth now broken into bits, Eggman resumes his plan to build his utopia, and leaves Sonic with energy-depleted Chaos Emeralds to fall towards the devastated continents below. Whereas a fall from space would give any hedgehog a rotten case of amnesia, a mysterious aura catches Sonic before collision and breaks his fall. After dusting himself off from the impact, Sonic encounters a small little guy, and thanks to Sonic's new appearance, he wakes up startled. After calming down and reminding Sonic of his mechanic for the game, our newly befriended amnesiac begins to panic as he can't recall who he is, which leads Sonic to break the fourth wall in a lightly comical way.
Uh-oh, did I fall on him?
With the sun rising to a new day, Sonic agrees to help his new friend regain his memories, and the two set off for the fragmented world that awaits them, Sonic now temporarily free of his transformation. Upon arriving at the town of Apotos, Sonic decides to name his newfound companion Chip, following his enamored delight to the local ice cream which, for food in a 2008 video game, even I was taken aback with how delicious it looks. Hope that thing there isn't a tree nut, I'm allergic. Excuse me, I was getting off topic. The two of them press on throughout the day, learning what they can about either Chip's memory or a solution for the power-drained Chaos Emeralds. but to no avail. Once night falls, however, Sonic finds himself back into his Werehog state. But the weird air isn't just exclusive to Sonic, as he and Chip find the jolly ice cream vendor from before now crying in despair. As someone who's worked a few jobs in retail, I can understand this pessimism. Thanks to this encounter, though, Sonic discovers a new ability that comes with his transformation, allowing him to stretch his limbs to extreme lengths. I shall now dub this transformation as Werehog D Sonic. After an evening stroll and fighting some creatures of the night, Sonic manages to reunite with Tails. Asking his best friend on any way that could help restore the planet, Tails informs Sonic on someone who is able to give them a helping hand, an elderly college instructor in Spagonia, Professor Pickle. With the stars now aligning to fix up the planet and the Chaos Emeralds, Sonic, Tails, and Chip soar across the fragmented planet to find the answers they're looking for. And there's our setup for Sonic Unleashed. From this point onward, more characters and story will come in smaller chunks the more of the world we see. So instead of gameplay taking a backseat until somewhere near the middle of the video, I've decided to switch back and forth between story and gameplay for this Inquire to keep things moving. And on the topic of moving, Windmill Isle introduces us to a brand new gameplay style that had not been seen in a Sonic game up until this point. While it would lay the foundation for future Sonic games to come, this game is the debut of the boost formula in the Sonic series. And I gotta say, its first impression does not disappoint. Where Sonic Adventure's gameplay style for Sonic felt like a standard transition for 2D to 3D platforming, Unleashed's new playstyle has Sonic reach exhilarating velocities the series hadn't seen up until this point. Act 1 eases the player in with a bit of open space to work with to get acquainted with the new controls. The homing attack is back, and for the first time in the series with a lock-on reticle. It's kinda damning in retrospect it took 10 years for the homing attack to get a reticle, but it is what it is. Instead of hitting the same button twice this time around, you'll be jumping then hitting an adjacent face button. It's an adjustment that's made for aiding different options for air maneuverability we get later on, such as the new air dash, stomp, and returning lightspeed dash. Of course, the namesake of the formula is the boost. If Sonic has enough energy from collecting rings, holding the X button on foot will send Sonic accelerating through the level. To this point in the series, Sonic's speed has never felt this thrilling. Even after guiding him through dash panels, watching him simply gain more and more speed as he rams through countless robots, gathering rings to keep the boost meter going, crushing time records replaying each stage. The satisfaction of it all I find melds beautifully together. Whereas stages from Adventure 2's A rank criteria came from an accumulated high score, reaching S ranks after replaying and mastering each stage's layout proved to be a great evolution for the Sonic series at the time. And that's not to say I don't have gripes with certain aspects of daytime gameplay. The greater elements are just simply overwhelming us all. One particular issue that's very noticeable further into the game is that, even with a superb amount of speed, player control to an extent is compromised. I'm sure you've noticed by now, but level design compared to prior entries is a lot more linear in progression. Many of Sonic's levels in the games I covered previously were certainly more open in terms of design and exploration. Likewise, the control in both Adventure 1 and 2 allowed the player to not just openly explore for bonuses, but to also experiment and optimize their quickest routes to the goal. Now, Unleashed still provides the player with options and shortcuts to cut down on time. That's all fine and good, but when you slow down to smell the roses or backtrack to pick up a collectible, you'll notice a stiffer feeling with turning and jumping. These kinds of laggard movements make faster-paced maneuvers, such as drifting for instance, to feel more unpolished and anxiety-inducing as a result. It feels pretty unnatural and juxtaposed to the rest of the gameplay style, especially when it comes to getting... well, we'll get to that in due time. To end on a more complimentary note though, a more controversial aspect of the boost gameplay is how levels will often shift between 3D and a 2.5D perspective that mimics the Sonic Rush titles. In Sonic Unleashed, I don't mind the 2.5D elements as much, as I feel they're more naturally built into the level design and world here. Even when Sonic goes into that different perspective, it's never for too long, nor does it feel like a crutch between 3D segments. Even with my qualms, the daytime stages are damn good fun. While I do miss the more explorative aspects of previous Sonic games, the formula Sonic Team came up with here provides an excellent foundation for games to come. So after a plane level that I frankly have little to say about, other than it makes Sky Chase look like a Nier Automata shooter, Sonic and co arrive at the continent of Spagonia. The assistant at the university informs them, however, that Professor Pickle was taken by Eggman, giving the three's next destination to infiltrate his base, located in Missouri. Following an additional flight and evening stroll, the party gets to Eggman's base no sweat, and they free the hoagie-obsessed old-timer from confinement. Eggman later on, actually, has one hell of a good-looking sandwich himself. Perhaps the two had a nice lunch together. But no. After escorting him back to Spagonia, Professor Pickle informs Sonic on what has really been going on. The shadowy entity that lingers beneath the Earth's crust and our deity monster of the game is known as Dark Gaia, a being who sleeps for 1,000 years with the sole purpose of wreaking nocturnal havoc upon awakening. Because Eggman was the alarm clock that prematurely woke Dark Gaia, its full powers aren't quite up to snuff, giving our heroes some time to spare. As if it was some type of Sonic game, restoring the Chaos Emeralds becomes priority 1. Visiting the 7 temples of Gaia across the globe will restore each emerald's power, and with the emerald's restored power, it serves as a catalyst to return the Earth's pieces back to where they belong. So flying back to Missouri, again, Sonic gets to have an encounter with Eggman, now searching for the Gaia temples himself and pretty peeved that Sonic survived falling from space. After saving the locals and squashing the Doctor's latest contraption, Sonic and Chip find the first Gaia temple. Upon approaching the pedestal, Chip's newly discovered ability activates the altar. Hint hint. The first emerald is restored, and the process of healing the planet begins as the first fragment reattaches itself to the Earth's core. From this point on, the story beats will take Sonic, Chip, and Tails serving as their Uber across 6 more continents. A fight with either a creation from Eggman or a leading spawn of Dark Gaia will occur, and a piece of the planet will be restored back to normal, further delaying the return of Dark Gaia's full power. It's a standard Sonic premise to have some fun with the Chaos Emeralds and preventing your monster of the week from having its way. But if I'm being frank here, Sonic Unleashed's narrative is among one of my favorites in the series. Released in a time where others bemoaned and criticized the involvement of Sonic's additional cast, the story's more focused approach on Sonic and Chip exploring the world and how they're characterized serve as a great palate cleanser in terms of focus. That's not to say I didn't mind the inclusion of Sonic's friends, but I do admit in the heat of the Dark Ages they weren't utilized to their best. Even so, Unleashed does begin a concerning trend regarding characters like Tails and Amy taking a back seat while Sonic thrives in the spotlight. Hell, Knuckles is nowhere to be seen in this title, but that's not stopping his prior voice actor Dan Green from appearing in this game. It's an issue that frankly wouldn't be mended until games like Sonic Mania or Frontiers' additional content updates, where the spotlight would be shared once again with the extended cast. Regardless, the narrative is a step up from Shadow's multiple-rooted mess of a story, or 06's plot-hole-ridden soap opera. Now, while both adventure titles had darker elements in their plots and took themselves a little too seriously as well, I think what keeps both adventure narratives up comparatively is SA1's vignette approach exploring each character's growth, and SA2's themes and established lore being something that can captivate the player. With Unleashed in particular, it has my favorite characterization of Sonic. He has a bit more of an older brother demeanor with the likes of Tails and Chip, mostly reflected in Jason Griffith's performance directed to sound more mature. Even so, Sonic remains true to himself between living with that carefree attitude of his and the myriad of quips at his disposal. Even when the sun goes down, despite that dark energy bringing out a more aggressive and feral side, he's never like Bully Maguire over here acting bad to the bone for the sake of it.
Now dig on this.
On the topic of the Werehog, I've had my fun in the sun, so I say it's about time we look into our second gameplay style. So with the setting of the sun, the dark energy within Sonic will have him transform back into the Werehog, and in turn alter his gameplay style. With the day stages giving us some of the fastest speeds we've seen Sonic run, the night stages on the other hand slow down Sonic to a significant amount. The gameplay style here is what will either make or break this entry depending on the kind of person. It's a gameplay style that exchanges speed for versatile combat options with the transformation Sonic is given. Stage progression, likewise, is slowed down a fair bit too. Platforming is still a pillar of focus in this style, as we'll see later on, but you now have the inclusion of waves upon waves of enemies to shred through, and the occasional puzzle solving to progress. I think it's time for me to be fully transparent with you lot on my thoughts regarding this style and its execution. It is pretty alright. I find that even with my own issues that I'll soon touch upon, this style of gameplay, despite being an inverse of Sonic's core fundamentals, provides a surprisingly neat deviation that has more teeth to it than at first glance. Sonic's base movement is slowed down, but it's nimbler than I make it out to be. Compared to the daytime stage's control being stiff at slower speeds, Sonic at night feels a lot more comfortable to move around with. Holding the trigger speeds him up a fair bit to get him through the stage, but his standard jog speed offers more freedom with exploring your surroundings. With those stretchy arms of his comes his main method of attack, being claw swipes and large punches with the fists. I'll admit that the base starting combos are nothing to write home about and can get stale pretty quick. But the more you level up Sonic's combat potential, more options will open up to deal with what Dark Gaia throws at you. I've gone on a bit in regard to leveling up attributes, so to dive into that real quick, when Sonic takes out enemies both during the day and night, the enemies will drop these yellow crystals, serving as experience to improve Sonic's stats. At the end of every stage, you'll be given the option to level any of these stats you desire. While your option for day attributes are pretty straightforward with speed and ring energy for boost, the night attributes on the other hand offer a lot more variety. Your prime targets for all of these facets, of course, being the enemies you fight. The occasional Eggman robot will show up every now and then, but it's Dark Gaia's spawn you'll be dealing with every night, though the enemy variety itself is on the more limited end. I will admit, I actually do like experimenting and unleashing different kinds of attacks on these enemies. You could say it might be the Hyrule Warriors and One Piece Pirate Warriors fan in me, but while plenty may find the actual combat itself on the more repetitive end, I don't mind it nearly as much when I'm given the options to shake things up or experiment around with. Some combos are, of course, more useful than others, but I will still commend the effort given to how much they wanted to put into the combat. I do wish, however, the game didn't throw as much enemies as they did at you within each night level. Something that certainly slows down the pace of this gameplay style I wouldn't necessarily say is the level design or actual combat itself, but rather the onslaught of enemies Sonic will be faced with. It's what will usually hamper the stage progress the most and take up the most time to get through a level. Sonic games entering the 3D era weren't shy to draw out level length, and I'd say for the earlier entries, that sweet spot for level length is between 3 to 5 minutes. In games like Sonic Heroes, Shadow, and 06, those can easily be drawn out between 8 to 12 minutes given the playstyle. With Sonic Unleashed, while your day stages can hit that sweet spot mentioned prior, the night stages vary a lot more greatly in length, and I don't just mean 8 to 12 minutes. I mean 15 to over 20 minutes depending on the main act and your experience with the game. Even as someone who doesn't mind the combat as much, I will take issue with how the game distributes just how much you fight in a single level. It's a reason why levels like the Night Axe for Dragon Road is a favorite of mine, and Arid Sands is a least favorite. The former has a pretty okay distribution of enemies and has more of a focus on getting through the level itself. The latter, on the other hand, feels very boxed in, and getting a gemstone for a certain puzzle requires you to cut through a monotonous amount of enemies. It's apparent that the devs of this game wanted to get in on the craze of various beat-em-ups that were present in the mid to late 2000s with this kind of playstyle. And while I will defend many aspects to the combative style presented to us here, I can't say the same necessarily for just how many enemies will break the pace of a level. The levels themselves, though, in terms of design and removing the enemies from the equation, I actually like a fair bit. Where I fostered a few gripes with certain facets of exploration being lost with the new boost gameplay style, I find that the night stages provide more of those more explorative elements to early 3D Sonic levels. Using his stretchy arms, Sonic will be able to grab and vault off certain ledges, grapple onto certain blocks on the side of walls, swing from certain poles and flying enemies, and climb across vertical poles within the environment. The slower control allows for Sonic to be more precise with a higher emphasis on platforming here, which I greatly appreciate. While Sonic's double jump as the Werehog is nothing remarkable, I think the incorporation of his nimbler features here make platforming, while slower in the day, pretty comfortable. You'll also solve a few short puzzles on occasion. It's usually your simple affairs such as rotating or pulling a few levers, pushing some blocks over switches, placing certain jewels in these pedestals to open a door, or pushing on buttons in a certain order. Nothing too mind-blowing, but in terms of pacing out a level, I would take these in exchange for cutting down on some of the enemies you fight. I'm also satisfied with the more open direction of these levels, not only for the sake of collectibles and extra lives, but also because it's easier to spot those pain-in-the-asses that are... not yet. Just a little longer. So while the Werehog itself has a handful of issues to talk about, it's something I don't entirely mind too much. The enemies can be pretty fun to fight when they're not constantly thrown your way to halt level progression, and the platforming, an element Sonic is known for, I found to be very rock solid here. Even with its slower approach to what is ultimately a contrast to Sonic's identity, this alternate style to me offers solid enough gameplay with a good amount of effort put into it that we didn't necessarily see for other previous gameplay styles in the series. And contextually with the world and story itself, it blends in pretty well without sticking out like a sore thumb. And let me tell you, the world is still something else to look at. Even for a game made on 360 and PS3 hardware, it has graphically stood the test of time. I want to thank my brother for allowing me to record off his Series X, as it has allowed me to capture Sonic Unleashed without the restraints of last-gen hardware. With Unleashed's core focus on a globetrotting adventure, there's been a lot of care and attention to detail placed within its various locales, each of which takes loving inspiration from real-world cultures and locations. You have a calm ocean-faring Apotos, the bustling savannas of Missouri, a historically rich city with Spagonia, the Arctic snowscapes of Holiska, a serene and mountainous locale with Chunan, the scathing deserts of Shamar, jaw-dropping tropics with Adabat, the jam-packed and bustling Empire City, and to top it all off, one of the most difficult levels in all of Sonic with Eggman Land. Every continent has something that sets it apart from others within the game, and day or night, there is never a dull moment graphically. Suffice it to say though, on original hardware, the graphical fidelity came at the price of a constantly tanking frame rate. Jungle Joyride may be one of the most beautiful levels in Sonic Unleashed, but strained the game's frame rate miserably. Once again, I would like to thank my brother for allowing me to record from his Series X, as the additional firepower allows this title to present itself the way it was always meant to be. Everywhere you look in the game's world, there's something to take note of, and there are denizens of each country to give Sonic a warm welcome in the towns he and Chip visit. For the first time since Sonic Adventure 1 on the Dreamcast, human characters in the Sonic universe don't clash with our colorful cast of anthropomorphic animals. It's always been a point of contention to have Sonic walk around and interact with human beings, and from Adventure 2 to 06, they skewed towards a more realistic direction, where I think the low-poly folks of Station Square still look a-okay. Human characters have just never looked great post-Dreamcast launch. Here though, the art team found a style that leans more cartoony while complementing Sonic's core cast, and the presented diversity is stellar to boot. The hub world themselves are more condensed than Adventure and 06's hubs, and while Sonic's speed is capped to make sure he isn't running face first into buildings, the brisk pace is more than manageable. Past each town though will be the gates to small action areas which lead to your standard levels, with their own puzzles to solve, upgrades to acquire, and collectibles to gather. Within each town, Sonic will be able to spend rings on different kinds of food and souvenirs that give each country their own distinct feeling. You can bring these souvenirs back to Professor Pickle's lab and view them in your collectibles page alongside concept art, character enemy profiles, and the game's cutscene theater. Of course, with the ongoing conflicts within the world, the townspeople have different kinds of troubles of their own. While optional, these small interactions with each townfolk are a nice little breather that make each place feel lived in. Your affairs range from helping a doctor out with medicine to help cure Sonic's evening transformation, bringing a woman home after constantly getting lost, speaking to a timid traveling merchant who is also a puppeteer, or even a man looking into the mystery of the two ghosts from the Night of the Werehog short. At night, some of these villagers are possessed by Dark Eye's influence and aren't themselves, either down in the dumps or seeming like they've had too much to drink. After unlocking Chip's camera, the flash from taking photos of people will bring the spawn out and give Sonic a job of quick exorcism to perform. All of this stuff, while small, has plenty of decent thought put into it, and it's something I personally appreciate when it comes to giving Sonic Unleashed its own unique qualities from other Sonic games. There is, of course, still the matter of restoring the planet, but making a difference in each country gives that nice feeling of accomplishing that before setting off to each Gaia temple. But to get your keys to the Gaia temples, there's an elephant in the room I've been ignoring up until now. The Sun and Moon medals. Throughout the game, be it in the hub world or levels, you will come across these tokens that serve as not just another kind of collectible, but also access to additional missions during both the day and night. This unfortunately also includes main story levels. Most moon medals are a common find during the day, whereas sun medals are abundant at night. But geez, they're an absolute kick in the crotch if you don't have enough to progress the main story. The most notorious barrier without a doubt in my mind is Jungle Joyride's absurd tally for sun medals. If you're not diligent enough with going through each nook and cranny throughout the game, be it hub, stage, or even boss arena, you will be blocked from story progress. Hell, I had to make a dedicated session just for cleanup in a spot of medal hunting. It's an irritating pace breaker for those who are not in the mood to look into each and every corner the game has to offer. Well, I think this works better for unlocking those extra acts that are more bite-sized challenges, if anything. Having these be required to keep going through the story is an archaic design choice that even I can't defend. Now, the boss fights are something I can give a good word for, however. Before Sonic and Chip are able to enter the temples, a boss guarding each entrance will be an obstacle to take on. During the day, Eggman will throw a swarm of his most esteemed mechs at Sonic on an on-rails track. Honestly, looking back at these, I forgot how dynamic the day boss fights were. Compared to future entries, a handful of 3D bosses dissolve into Sonic dodging and homing in on a mech in an otherwise relatively flat track. Here though, you have the Egg Beetle that tries to pinch in and lob at you from the side, the Egg Devil Ray having you dodge projectiles from a top-down view, and the Egg Lancer where it takes Sonic from running on cliff sides to wall jumping from one last hit. The fights, like most Sonic boss battles, are pretty standard when it comes to challenge, but the action on display here to complement the new style of gameplay makes it feel very fresh and memorable. At night, you have some of the deadlier spawn of Dark Gaia to deal with. Letting Sonic let loose is the Werehog in his combat utility. Dark Gaia Phoenix has you lobbing water jars to cool it off. Dark Moray has you lowering the arena shield, then going in for the weak points, and Dark Guardian sees you pushing salt blocks to exercise its health. Like how the day bosses take from the frenetic choreography, the night bosses incorporate that mix of fisticuffs and small obstacles to take care of. With the Werehog in particular, Sonic gets to utilize the riveting feature of the 2000s, being the QuickTime event button prompts. While these are present throughout the game when Sonic jumps off ramps or serves as an opening to finish an enemy, here they're used to bring bosses to their knees. Make like that doorbell sound effect and knock him dead. QTEs nowadays aren't too special, nor do I particularly care for them, but looking back at a game from 2008, it's an interesting sight to see an old example of a game using prompts to present gameplay choreography. Even so, it's fun seeing Sonic smack a large bird down like a Tom and Jerry cartoon. When the boss victory is ensured, the path to restoring the Chaos Emerald follows suit, and in the second to last of these Gaia temples is something special. Upon touching the mural in Adabat's temple, Chip perceives what seems to be more of his latent abilities, and with it, his memories returned. The small fella traveling with us is revealed to be none other than Light Gaia, the deity protector of the planet and Dark Gaia's natural counterpart. Like Dark Gaia's powers not being at 100% due to an Eggman wake-up call, Chip's amnesia was triggered by the planet breaking apart earlier than it does. Even so, Chip never had the opportunity to learn about the world he's always looked after, and thanks to Sonic's kindness, he got to understand how important his role is and why it's worth protecting the planet. After a nice heart-to-heart where it seems Chip intends to part ways, Sonic reassures him that he'll stick with him if it means helping out any of his friends. It's a very nice scene, honestly, and as I mentioned a little earlier, it shows a side of Sonic that illustrates why his characterization here is among my favorite in the series. Even while possessing a fragment of darkness with the Werehog, he stays true to himself to help others in need. He helped to call back when Chaos's rage threatened Station Square, he helped to free the aliens from the rule under Eggman's thumb, and he's here helping Chip to prevent Dark Gaia's full return. On the topic of Chip, actually, throughout the game he's small comic relief with a big appetite in providing Tails with the sidekick residual check. Despite this, I was never really bothered by his presence at all. I think he's a pretty nice addition to Sonic's world given his role in the game. Even if it's just for this entry, I really appreciate the friendship we see grow between him and Sonic. I like how expressive he can be to contrast the Werehog's moodier demeanor, and I really like what's in store for him during the endgame. And on that note...
Oh my god, I almost forgot this game's score!
So while Jun Snowy's iconic rock is out for this title, unfortunately, Unleash's score still stands incredibly strong as its production values reach for the stars. Leading the charge is sound director and lead music composer Tomoyo Otani, veteran sound talent at Sega. While Otani's score in other Sonic games has always been a joy to the ears, Unleash's score is both elevated and enriched by the fact they got the goddamn Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra to help out with this score. Some of their other work includes the score for Ghibli's The Cat Returns, and some of the orchestral work for both Kingdom Hearts 2 and 3. Some of the most notable songs from levels, boss battles, and hub worlds are all done so incredibly well. Each country in the game is given its own unique style of music to replicate the inspiration to each environment. While there are a handful of tracks that don't keep up as much as the others, Unleash still has a glowing score I could go on and on about. And of course, endless possibilities. Performed by Bowling for Soup's very own Jared Reddick, is among my absolute favorite vocal tracks in the Sonic series. It's a score that keeps the atmosphere going from beginning to end. And with that, we find ourselves at the end of it all. One last emerald to recharge, and one extremely challenging final level. While I didn't spend too much time on each stage, Eggman Land deserves a segment all on its own for how notoriously long and challenging it is in the HD version. As opposed to being split into acts like levels prior, and the Wii version for that matter, it is one whole act that has you switch between the Werehog and Hedgehog at various times with the flip of an hourglass. Well, I wish I could say this level was a highlight for me given its creative use of day and night mechanics and climactic atmosphere. The level's intense longevity speaks for itself. Nowadays, I can finish the level under half an hour, but don't be surprised if among your first playthrough this will take much longer. So after descending down the catacombs of Eggman Land and restoring the 7th Emerald's luster, the planet's final piece begins to descend back into place. All's well that ends well, right? Honestly, it'd be a little deflating if credits rolled directly after that level. Eggman descends from above and challenges Sonic to one last rumble as his base begins to collapse, piloting the very prototype mech that Supersonic decimated in the opening cutscene. Coming off many of the Dark Gaia's spawn bosses, fighting Eggman as a Werehog is a fun contrast to what came before, and serves as a nice change of pace. Change of pace? A little bit of deja vu saying that as I fight him here. I don't think it's my favorite final Eggman fight, but it's nonetheless a first fun chapter to this game's finale. Before ending their conflict proper within the Earth's core, Dark Gaia makes an entrance nearing the apex of its power. Eggman, thinking he's got the upper hand on the ancient deity, gets properly sent on his way into the Exosphere with style. Well, I hope that Dreamcast in his cockpit is okay. Even though outclassed from sheer size, both Sonic and Chip get ready to make their final stand, But upon gazing down at Sonic's bestial form, Dark Gaia rips out its remaining essence from within Sonic. With Sonic now sapped of his energy and alternate playstyle, Dark Gaia now stands complete. Just a quick aside. When Sonic gets the Werehog drained from him, you hear the Star Wars blaster sound effect too, right? Enraged by the weakened state Dark Gaia puts Sonic in, Chip comes to his friend's aid and awakens his latent abilities in the nick of time. The Chaos Emerald hosting Gaia temples are summoned from across the globe and form a being to better counter his dark half, the Gaia Colossus. The time of awakening has arrived, and Sonic now stands along his friend's shoulder, ready to save the world once more. The final boss fight against Dark Gaia is pretty epic in scope, with Chip piloting the Colossus to Dark Gaia, charging towards the Serpent and boxing its lights out. Dark Gaia will grapple Chip and prepare to fire a beam point blank, which switches gameplay to Sonic. Simple stretches of boost gameplay will end with you ramping off the Colossus with a trick QTE and taking out Dark Gaia's eyesight. I will admit the first phase of this fight can get a little tiresome between the stiff Colossus movement and the off-def perception of punching these boulders. The short bursts of Sonic's gameplay are nice, but the rinse and repeat aspect of doing this formula 3 times spread them too thin. I may not be inquiring it here, but I'll give the edge to the Wii version's brawl here, where as opposed to this rinse and repeat formula, you do a light boxing match, then take care of Sonic's 3 gameplay sections all at once. The Wii and Nunchuck combo make it feel a little more frenetic to boot, even with the HD version's shortcomings. I persist for good reason. The final phase of this fight. Despite Sonic and Chip's best efforts, the battle only strengthens Dark Gaia to new heights, transforming it into a more grotesque yet all-powerful state. Perfect Dark Gaia. Wonder where they got that name from. Well, if it works, it works. With a new set of hands and a gross number of eyeballs, Dark Gaia's influence begins to drown the world into an ominous darkness. Just as it looks like this is the end, Sonic does what he does best, and the Chaos Emeralds come to him fully restored. The final phase now begins with Super Sonic and Light Gaia, whereas Sonic runs gradually out of rings in other entries. Gathering rings in this quick opening section serve to fill up a health bar for Sonic, which I think works pretty fine for this fight. Dark Gaia puts up a barrier that Chip is able to break through, leaving Sonic to attack Dark Gaia's tendrils while Chip keeps his opposite at bay. The movement around Dark Gaia's shield reminds me a little bit of Knights with how you control Sonic and pivot his momentum. All that's missing, frankly, is a few of those loops. When the shield comes down, Sonic saves Chip with one last QTE string, and then proceeds to land the finishing blow through Dark Gaia's eye, and sends the beast back into slumber. Now fatigued from the fight, Chip saves Sonic from falling into the Earth's core, and says a solemn goodbye to his friend, knowing that he has to slumber once again until the day he and Dark Gaia face off once more. Sonic is thrown out of the Earth's core into safety, leaving Chip quietly satisfied as the final piece of the planet falls back into place. In a segment that mirrors Sonic's crash landing at the beginning of the game, he finds a ring where he first discovered Chip, and treasures it as a memento, knowing that his friend will always be keeping an eye on him. With a new dawn in a safe world, Sonic takes in the sights before running to his heart's content. Tails, now free of the residual checks, catches up to his friend by plane, and thus ending Sonic Unleashed. And honestly, what else can I say after that? Ends the game on a very bright note with some of the best music in the series accompanying the credits. When Sonic Unleashed came out, it was at a time when Sonic's future seemed uncertain, broken, even scary. Even so, despite its very apparent downsides, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Sonic Unleashed. Its story is among my favorite in the series and offers production values unlike any previous entry had seen. The world shines with ambition between its art direction, general atmosphere, and settings brimming with life. The entry established a bold and exhilarating new gameplay style for Sonic between superb high-octane action and ease of replayability. Like the world itself, though, the game can offer moments of weakness as well. The Sun and Moon medals as progression barriers can kiss my ass. And even though I enjoyed the Werehog for what it is, the cracks can show between its abundance of enemies, select level longevity, and combat where its mileage won't enamor all. That being said, I still personally find satisfaction from combat experimentation and great platforming sequences. It's a gameplay style you'll have to get a feel for yourself if you ask me. Though not all of them are home runs, the bosses who are fought here are attuned to the spectacle of the game, both day and night. QTEs are a concept best left in the past, but there are some moments of it here in the game where it's more of an indifference or guilty pleasure. Some hub world activities won't be for everyone, but the effort put into civilians and local delicacies show apparent ambition. And of course, the score is in the Sonic Soundtrack Hall of Fame. Coming off of one of the most detested games in the series is a game that offered a glimpse of a bright future for Sonic. Sonic Unleashed is both an incredibly ambitious yet beautiful entry. The issues with the game are very apparent, and I'll stand by that. But even if the cards are stacked heavily against it in an online discussion, Sonic Unleashed will be a game I'll continue to stand by for on account of its brightest moments in the series. It's among one of my favorite Sonic titles. While I wouldn't advise this to be an entry-level Sonic title on account of its more challenging aspects, I still encourage others to give this game a fair shake. The Werehog as a gameplay style is something that an individual player has to get a feel for themselves, but I think for those who stick with it, even just for the runs in the sun, I feel you're in for a treat. If you like the thoughts I shared today about this game, be sure to like and subscribe for future inquiries such as these, as I find the support and feedback to be very helpful. That being said, thank you all for watching. I've been the Squire, and be kind to one another.